building a better Bay Area. Moving forward, finding solutions. This is ABC7 News.
I'm Kristen Z. You're watching Getting Answers live on ABC7, Hulu Live, and wherever you stream. We're asking experts your questions every day at 3 to get answers for you in real time. Today, we'll clarify the confusion and explain what is and what is not in the current spending and infrastructure bills after a dramatic day on Capitol Hill. Also, we'll get into the science of why we're seeing less of that famous San Francisco fog these days and what the implications are for you. But first, Mark Zuckerberg announced a rebranding of the parent company of Facebook. It's called Meta.
We live for what we're building, and while we make mistakes, we keep learning and building and moving forward. So, for all of you who share these values, I dedicate today to you. In my mind, you're the heroes in our society who push the world forward. And as long as I'm running this company, I will do my best to celebrate this spirit and absolutely go for it.
All right, that was Mark Zuckerberg, and joining us now to talk about this is Shireen Ghaffari, a senior correspondent at Vox's Rico. Shireen, thanks for your time today. I know you've been following this closely. Look, we knew Facebook was going to rebrand and reveal the name of a parent company that would include Facebook, and today we have it. So the big announcement, the name is Meta. What's the public reaction?
I've heard a lot of confusion. I think for people who are not familiar with Facebook's big metaverse plans, this sort of seems out of the blue. And for people who have been following Facebook in the news lately, it just seems like very odd timing, given that Facebook has been mired in controversy due to the release of thousands of documents by a whistleblower to the Wall Street Journal and other publications.
Yeah, certainly. There are a lot of jokes on Twitter about, the rebranding coming at a time, as you mentioned, when Facebook is under so much pressure, criticism over its business practices, and people are saying, oh, look at this shiny object. We got a new name. We got a new logo. It's a distraction tactic. Will it work?
I mean, look, I will first of all say that Facebook has been thinking about this metaverse idea for a very long time. CEO Mark Zuckerberg has said that he started this name change process 6 months ago. That being said, I do think that it is acting as a distraction and that there's something else to talk about today on the news other than, Facebook's research proving that it can be harmful to teenagers on Instagram. So, this is serving as a distraction in that it is a break in the negative news cycle. But long term, I do think people are not going to forget about the issues that have come up through this whistleblower's leaks.
All right, let's talk about this, right? I think you already saw the sign up at headquarters. It looks kind of like an infinity symbol. Is that an actual symbol for Meta? Talk about Meta. Like, what are they trying to project themselves as with the name Meta?
So the concept is that, the future of computing is not going to be computers or mobile phones or even social media apps anymore. How Mark Zuckerberg sees it, we're all going to be in this sort of 3D, VR, virtual reality enabled universe called the metaverse. And we will all sort of be like avatars of ourselves. We're projecting holograms and all this futuristic sci-fi kind of stuff. And so the meta naming is a nod to this metaverse vision that Facebook sees it becoming. Also, Meta, it has a Greek meaning, and Zuckerberg said that he's a fan of the classics and has long studied Roman and Greek empires. So he liked that had a play as well.
All right, so as I understand, this umbrella, Meta umbrella, will have what? Instagram, WhatsApp, right? And Oculus, which I guess is getting rid of its name. And right, Oculus is going away as a name.
That's right. They are sunsetting the Oculus brand. Everything is turning into Meta. If you go to Facebook's corporate website today, you will no longer see the Facebook logo. You will see the Meta logo, which is sort of a infinity sign with slightly imperfect circles. They're going full force on the rebrand for every single one of Facebook's products, except for Facebook itself. That app will remain the same.
Okay, how does Oculus, the whole AR, VR product, play a major role in this Zuckerberg vision of connecting everything, where you live, work, and play, like in this 3D way on virtual? Explain that to us.
Yeah, so I think the way that we largely use Facebook on the computer or on our phones today, how Mark Zuckerberg sees it is that we will all be using either like VR headsets like the Oculus or some kind of AR, like a new pair of glasses that they're working on, which are sort of like those Ray-Ban smart glasses they made, but that will actually have more power to sort of project these virtual reality components. Like when you're walking down the street, you can project an image of your friend who you're talking to halfway across the world. That being said, we're a far ways from that. Other companies have tried this. I don't know if anyone remembers Google Glass in the 2000s, early 2000s. So there have been many, many attempts by big tech companies to try to make AR and VR really mainstream and used in day-to-day life. So far, we have not really seen it take off beyond sort of the niche gaming circles. But never say never, and tech can change very quickly. So Facebook is pouring billions into this. We will see if that changes.
I mean, do we really need to play and connect in 3D, I guess, with VR goggles? Can't we just connect in 3D in the real world?
Look, I think a lot of people are not yet sold on the idea of the metaverse yet. That being said, if you ask someone in 1995 if we would all be using something called the iPhone, where we listened to music and texted and went online, you'd probably think that they were crazy. So it's really hard to gauge sort of the future of technology in the long term. Right. I think there's always room for radical transformation, but are we all going to be plugged into the metaverse tomorrow? No.
I mean, one of the things that Facebook has been criticized for is that everything they do seems to be for your data and, you know, advertisers' dollars. So explain how this metaverse could aid in that particular mission of, you know, generating more ad dollars. How does that add value to advertisers?
Absolutely. Well, if you think about it right now, all that Facebook knows about you is sort of what you input on your mobile device or on your computer, what buttons you're pressing, et cetera. But with the metaverse, especially if you have something on your face or you're using your hands to do these like simulations in AR and VR, then they have a lot more inputs about you, right? They might know how much you're sweating. They might know where your eyeballs are looking. They may know your facial expression. So we're a long ways away from Facebook actually monetizing on that data, but there are certainly possibilities for the company to start tracking that kind of information and making money off of it.
All right. Yet, despite those potential issues, it seems like Wall Street or investors like it, right? I mean, the reaction was positive today.
It was. And you know what? Wall Street likes more opportunities to make money, right? And they like innovation. And a day away from the negative news cycle about the social harms of Facebook proper, that's probably a good one for Facebook financially. So I think, you know, some would see this as a smart move.
Interesting. You mentioned how this is, in fact, a headlines distraction from the problems that Facebook has been, you know, plagued with. But I wonder, in this metaverse, will the same problems that plague Facebook exist, or perhaps even grow, which is what it sounds like the potential is there, right?
Absolutely. I think we're only going to see more issues in the metaverse about, is technology invading our personal privacy? Is technology drawing people into these kinds of filter bubbles where they're even more immersed than they were before, because you're not only looking at 2D on your phone, you're in 3D, right? Is this sort of becoming a dangerous escape from reality for people? I think these questions are going to become bigger and bigger for Facebook. And there was very little discussion of it, honestly, today, of these sort of issues in their presentation. They sort of said, we're going to work this out. So TBD on how the company will handle that.
All right, Shireen Ghaffari, senior correspondent at Vox's Recode. Thank you so much for that mega, not meta, insight. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Coming up next, President Joe Biden made an appearance on Capitol Hill today in a dramatic move to try to get the infrastructure and spending bills passed. We'll clarify what is happening and why you should care. That breakdown next.
8, 7, 6, 5 seconds, 4, 3, 2, 1.
President Biden is making a last-minute push. He has now headed overseas. After months of negotiations, he announced the framework for his economic relief plan and his Build Back Better agenda. ABC News political director Rick Klein explains and helps us sort out what happened and what is expected to happen. Rick, thank you so much for your time today. There's some serious drama in Washington. First, President Biden went to Capitol Hill, right? That's dramatic enough before he left for the G20 summit. And then while there, he pleaded with Democrats to say, come together, got to get Build Back Better through. And this is what he said, right? I don't think it's hyperbole to say that the House and Senate majorities and my presidency will be determined by what happens in the next week. Rick, that is dramatic, but is it accurate?
He's laying it all on the line, and I think he recognizes this is his agenda. It's all sitting there right there. And the argument that Democrats have made to the American people is this is what you sent us to Washington to do. They need to be able to say that they actually did it. This has been just a disaster of a process for Democrats. So at this point, the best that they can hope for is that they have a final product that they can take to voters that people are going to understand and be generally happy with, because so far no one has really liked what they've seen.
All right, we're going to dive into who's not happy with what in a second. But first, just clarify the confusion. A lot of people don't understand. There are a couple bills going on here. There's the infrastructure, and then there's the reconciliation bill. Explain what is in what and how the two are tied together.
Sure. The infrastructure bill has bipartisan support. But what that would do is increase funding for roads and bridges, high-speed rail, also high-speed internet around the country. The only thing holding that up is that progressives don't want to vote for it unless they know that they've got the moderates on board for the much larger bill on social spending. That bill, which is now down to about $1.75 trillion from $3.5 trillion, that would expand the social safety net in vast ways. It would mean additional funding for childcare, help for parents, help for education, including universal pre-K, a sweeping set of reforms. But these two bills have long been linked, and that's been part of the problem, is that you could pass any individual piece of this or even an entire bill, but because they're both there, you need everyone to trust each other inside the Democratic Party. We're only talking about Democrats working with Democrats. No Republicans are likely to help with either of these bills in a substantial way. So that means they have to trust each other, and that just does not exist. It has not happened.
Yeah, and they don't really have the margins to work with, so they can't lose a single Democrat. But let's talk about exactly what's in that social safety net bill and what's in there, because, you know, there have been so many things that were put in, but then they were taken out and whittled down to lower the cost of the whole package. So what exactly is still in there, and what really key pieces that progressives really fought for are now out?
Yeah, what is in there is items that would give essentially universal pre-K. You'd have an additional year of the child tax credit, the checks that so many parents got. You'd also have vast new funding to help seniors get the care they need, help families take care of older relatives as well as younger relatives. There'd be pretty big investments in climate change as well, vast new incentives to try to modernize the electrical grid and to phase out coal-fired dirtier nuclear or dirtier plants. What was lost, though, has been the idea of universal payment or universal free community college. That is now not in the bill. And family and medical leave. This is something that was vital to so many Democrats in the campaigns they made to say that this country, like most other industrialized countries, should mandate that someone that has a kid should be able to get some paid time off. That appears to be out of the bill. That is a huge disappointment to so many people who have fought for that to be included. And I think the danger is that this bill continues to be defined by all the things it doesn't do as opposed to the many things it does.
And is one of the things that it doesn't do now the lower drug prices by leveraging Medicare negotiating with pharmaceuticals? Is that gone too?
Yeah, and that's another good point to make. I mean, this is something that actually doesn't cost the taxpayers anything. It is something that both Democrats and Republicans going back 20 years have said should be the case, that Medicare should be able to go directly to drug companies and negotiate lower prices. It's pure savings for taxpayers. That appears to be out of the bill against fierce opposition from the pharmaceutical industry, who point out that they've got to be able to make a profit. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to have things like the COVID-19 vaccine. So it's been a successful push by the big pharma lobby to be able to get that out. So it has become a lobbyist dream and defined in a lot of ways, as I said, by the things that that have been victories for lobbyists, but not necessarily a victory for taxpayers.
Look, some of the headlines say, hey, one singular senator is costing hundreds of millions of people paid family leave. Is that an accurate way to look at it?
Only if you look at it from the perspective of the Democrats needing to stay together. You can look at it another way and say 51 senators are ready to vote against it because all the Republicans are united in opposition. It's a quirk of the very specific procedural means that Democrats are using here, where this is the only way they can pass something that avoids a Senate filibuster. It means getting it through with only 50 votes. And in that sense, yeah, there's one Democratic holdout, maybe two on a whole bunch of provisions. But again, that's because there's 100 senators and only 50 of them are Democrats. So if you have more than half the Senate opposed to something, it doesn't take an advanced degree in political science to understand that you don't get something done.
Right. That's exactly true. Look, two of the senators, the so-called moderates who have been standing in the way of a lot of these things, Kristen Sinema and Joe Manchin. Let's talk about them. In particular, Manchin has been very opposed to the so-called billionaires tax to fund this ambitious agenda. Explain to people what it is that was proposed and what exactly he's opposed to.
Yeah, the so-called billionaires tax would change the way that income is calculated specific for people with that very high net worth, maybe as few as 100 people or so across the country. Right now, you only get taxed on income when you essentially cash out on an investment. This would calculate things as you go along and have this additional as-you-go tax that would apply only to the wealthiest of the wealthy. That appears to be out. It would be problematic to enact. I think a lot of people were worried that billionaires would find other ways to invest in things that aren't as taxable as traditional stocks and bonds, take their money essentially out of the economy and into maybe in a collectibles market or buying ranches and the like. So that does not appear to be in there. And it's been pointed out that, Joe Manchin has talked a lot about what's good for West Virginia. West Virginia actually doesn't have any billionaires.
I was going to say, right?
His constituents wouldn't have been among those impacted. There's a lot more in California, let's say, than in West Virginia.
And probably a lot of his constituents that would have benefited from being able to have this whole package and some of the widening social safety net. So I wanted to ask you, though, right now the votes are looking very iffy, right? If you had to guess, do you think it's going to happen at all today or tomorrow?
It seems unlikely. I think the president now out of the country for a couple of days. Some of the momentum is likely to be lost. I feel like there was an element of showmanship and a bit of a bluff by the White House to try to suggest that a deal is at hand when in fact you don't actually have that locked in yet. So I think as soon as they have the votes, they're going to call for it in the House and try to lock it down in the Senate, but they haven't been able to make that kind of guarantee yet. So
President Biden had to leave for Europe to the G20 and the UN Climate Summit without a victory in hand, without being able to say the U.S. is back in terms of leadership on climate issues, right? Because there are portions in the bill that would have tried to fight that. So I'm asking you, how much does this hurt the U.S. and hurt his ability to say the U.S. is back on the world stage as a leader?
It's a disappointment. There's no question. The White House wanted President Biden to be able to come with a big victory to say the U.S. is leading and also showing that democracy can work. That has not been demonstrated so far in the very ugly sausage-making process of this bill and so much else in Washington. It doesn't mean that they're not able to show leadership, but it does mean that that one big talking point that the president hoped to bring is not there. And frankly, it's his own party that's not giving it to him. It's been still the Democrats fighting against themselves that have been defining this legislative fight. Well,
partly the problem is the Democrats is a super wide tent, right?
Yes,
certainly wider than the Republican tent. All right, that was ABC News political director Rick Klein. All right, coming up next, are we seeing less fog around San Francisco? We'll talk to a local professor who says his research shows a clear answer. Next.
Commercial break.
What I should have said was an answer that's not at all foggy. All right.
First time talking to you over the phone, I didn't want to
Hello, everybody. I think you're going to appreciate this next conversation, especially if you live in the San Francisco Bay Area.
4, 3, 2.
Warming temperatures, that's impacted a lot of our life. But what about the iconic fog in and around San Francisco? Carl the Fog, Fog City. The fog has been a beloved staple of our Bay Area. But have you noticed less of it recently? Joining us now to talk more about this is ecology professor at UC Berkeley, Todd Dawson. Professor Dawson, thank you for your time.
Oh, thank you for having me. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. It does feel like we have fewer foggy days. I mean, I haven't had to turn on my fog lights, the yellow headlights in a long time. It's not just my perception, right?
It's not just your perception, it's the data. The data are clearly showing that we've had a decline in fog over about the last 60, 65 years here along the entire coastal California.
All right. How much less fog are we talking about when you compare, let's say, when you say 60 years ago versus like 20 years ago, 10 years ago versus today?
So the data that we've gathered in a couple of different ways. We've gathered it in terms of number of hours of fog during the fog season, which is generally between June and October. And then we've also done it on kind of an annual basis as well. And either way, it shows it's declined about 30 to 35%, or that ends up being about 3 hours less every day during the fog season.
All right, so we're talking about burning off faster or just fewer days where we see the fog at all?
So we have shorter days of fog and it does burn off faster. So both of those things are true.
All right, what about in the fog itself? Is there less precipitation? Did you look at that as well?
We have looked at that in a number of different ways. We've worked on fog and its interaction with the plants in the redwood forest. And what we're finding is with less fog, of course, there's less water input. That fog subsidy of water is really important here in coastal California because it really cools down the air, as you've already mentioned, and it also adds extra water in our dry season. And as there's less fog days and less hours of fog per day, that means there's less water coming into the coastal environment during the summer months.
All right, so here's the $64 million question, or $128 million, whatever you want to call it. But what is causing this?
Well, like most of the things that we're seeing in the climate system on Earth, the warming planet is really changing the way air circulates around the globe. And that plays out also on local scales. So two things are happening. We get a warming landmass here in California and all along the western edge of North America, and we get a warmer ocean, sea surface temperatures. Those two things are changing circulation, and part of what's linked to that circulation is a change in the amount of fog.
Is there some factor that's not related to climate change that's at play here as well?
It's largely all related to climate change, and it's an interaction, though, between how much moisture can be held in an air mass and also the temperature difference between right at the coast and inland, because that is what pulls that coastal fog on land every day. So the temperature difference has been going down between the coast and the inland, and we're changing sort of the circulation and the moisture holding capacity of the atmosphere as we warm it up.
All right, so what are the implications, right? Like one thing that comes to mind for me is that, hey, look, if you know you live in the East Bay, you know if you're across the Caldecott Tunnel, you have air conditioning, but in San Francisco, on the peninsula, Marin, you never had to, but perhaps you now have to get it, or new homes will have to have AC. What are some of the implications?
I think you put your finger on a couple of the real key ones. I think we can expect that our summers are going to just keep getting warmer. So we're used to having that fog air conditioner, the natural air conditioner that comes off the Pacific Ocean. If we have less of that, that means our air is going to be warmer, and people may have to resort to putting in AC in their homes. They may need to change, the way that they shade their home, putting up more drapes, maybe, umbrellas, things like that. But I think we can expect that things are on the warming trend, as we've seen pretty clearly over the last several decades.
All right, we have about 15 seconds here on air. What can we do if we want to keep our fog around as long as possible?
Well, it's all related to what we can do to prevent further climate change. So ride your bike, walk more, drive less, don't use as many fossil fuels, and let's combat this climate problem.
Professor Todd Dawson, we have to take a short break on the air, but we can continue this conversation on Facebook Live for a couple more minutes. Be right back.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, and so here we are, done with our on-air portion of the interview, but still on Facebook Live, just to wrap up the show. So, Professor Dawson, I'm also wondering, you know, has the disappearance of the fog picked up pace? I know you looked at 60 years, but does it seem to be getting, you know, like accelerating?
You know, that's a really great question, and it's been really hard to pull that out from the data. Something about the pace. We know it's been going down, but we also know it's been really variable. For example, we had a couple of very foggy years the last couple of years. And then we had during the drought of 2012 and 2016, we also had a couple of foggy years and a couple of not so foggy years. So part of the problem is that it's highly variable. Even though the general trend is on the decline, it's also variable year to year. And that, of course, makes it really hard to forecast what next year is going to be like.
Oh, sure. And I'm not even going to ask you to look at next year because I do understand. It's like rain from year to year, you know, you will get ups and downs, but the long-term trend, the pattern is, right, we're getting less and less of that, which is worrisome. Did you already tell me, if so, I apologize, whether you looked at corresponding temperatures around the Bay in the last 60 years?
We did look at corresponding temperatures. And in fact, the temperature records are much better than the fog records are. The fog records are only gathered in a few places. But of course, we have temperature records from all of the weather stations throughout California and the West.
Yeah.
And we did look at temperature. And I think what I mentioned is that the temperature differences between the coastal areas like San Francisco and Berkeley and the inland areas like Sacramento, that temperature difference has declined. It's gotten less.
Right.
And that means there's less of a pull from the heating inland on the coastal influence. And that therefore affects the fog in a negative way.
Professor Todd Dawson, I really enjoy learning all that from you. Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Great to speak with you.
3, 2, 1.
Thank you so much for joining us on this interactive show, Getting Answers. Tomorrow we'll have ABC7 News special correspondent Dr. Alok Patel to break down all the latest COVID-19 headlines and to answer your questions. We'll be here every weekday at 3 on air and on live stream answering your questions. World News Tonight is next.